would just like for you to be fully dressed.
So I guess we've only really got one proper bit of follow-up, haven't we? Which is follow-up that was brought up after we'd already discussed it between us after doing the edit and the show notes. So I feel like we're finally on the same wavelength as someone somewhere. And that was the whole Minotaur wedge situation.
Yeah, so after I'd edited the last episode, I was going through and checking the show notes, and I clicked on the link to Minotaur's page on the BattleBots website, and one of the images there is a picture of Minotaur with this feeder wedge, like that goes all the way across the bottom of the robot, like under their drum, which I perceive to be exactly what you described. I'm sure you're going to tell me that what you had in mind is slightly different, but yeah, it seems they have one and just didn't use it.
So to me, the wedge they've got there isn't doing any feeding. I'm not even really going to call it a wedge. It's just a bar that makes contact with the ground. More than anything, I think that's there just to lower the ground clearance when they come up against a flipper or anything else that relies on getting under them. I think that's all that's there for. Because an actual feeder wedge would be looking to bring an opponent into the upsweep zone of the disc. Sorry, the drum. That's not a mistake I should be making, is it?
Staying in, mate. You can re-record that as much as you like. I'm using the first take.
I have already made my peace with that, don't worry. So yeah, a feeder wedge to me would be much further forward and lifting an opponent far higher up. It seems from the image we have there that this so-called wedge doesn't even extend beyond the bottom of the drum. So I see that as purely being a measure against low ground clearances.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. It doesn't look like the kind of thing that would do much for feeding robots into their weapons. So yeah, I presume it's just a defense against low cutting or flippers and low cutting robots maybe. Do you think it would have helped them at all against Tombstone or not?
I think a proper solid wedge option would have given them a far greater chance to get that early undercutting hit that would have got Tombstone up and over. And once they've got that, they've got the potential to come in under the bar and get straight to that chain. Or just to the frame in general, because we know, let's face it, Minotaur hits hard enough that if it catches anything solid, it's doing major damage. So I do think in that situation, it would have maybe been the best strategic choice, especially knowing that Tombstone was going to come in that sort of undercutting setup. But of course, the trouble with Minotaur is it's already a very well optimised robot. Where on earth do you get the weight from to do that? You know, it's basically big billets of aluminium bolted together. It's not something where you can just take a couple of panels off.
Yeah.
And let's just take a moment to appreciate that I'm arguing for modularity here. Mr. Consistency strikes again.
Yeah, you are as consistent as you always are, which is, makes me happy.
It's nice to know that there's a little constant in life, isn't there,
So something else that seems to be a constant in life is new series of King of Bots. I noticed there's a new marking here in the front matter, so what's that about then?
So, we have seen, literally just today, a few hours before recording this, they have put out a call for entrance for a second series of King of Bots. We know next to nothing about it. We know they're planning to shoot in the second half of 2018, which, considering they're only taking applications now, it damn well better be in the second half of 2018. I'm assuming, and this could be way off-piste, I'm assuming that it is going to be very similar to the original King of Bots, purely because they're reusing the name with it. And of course, we liked to call This Is Fighting Robots King of Bots 1.5, but that was never really an official thing. That was just us seeing a number of similarities between the two in terms of venue, theme, I suppose, in terms of it being a robot fighting show, things like that. But really, they are working very hard to keep them separate. So yeah, I'm very hopeful that this will be the follow-up that King of Bots deserves.
Yeah, hopefully that means we get to see Spectre again, which is exciting.
Well, we are seeing Spectre again now, to be fair. It's just that you refuse to watch it. I mean, if you were that committed to getting more Spectre in your life, you'd be watching This Is Fighting Robots.
This is true.
I think you're a fraud.
I mean, it should be well established at this point that I am a fraud in this scene. I'm excited to see Spectre fight in a TV show that I'm willing to watch. We'll say that.
That's fair enough. I would say to anyone that's been skipping over the Chinese competitions in general, if you're not watching Clashbots, you're correct. It is not an enjoyable thing from a sort of British robot combat fan perspective. It has its moments, but it's tough work. This Is Fighting Robots, at the very least, seek out the battles-only edits, because there are some really good fights in there. They're not edited well. You can't really see all the action happening as we're used to it, but There are some really good machines in there, a lot of them from teams that we love and respect, and it's well worth checking out. But I'm not going to expect anyone to sit there through the half-hour sequences of celebrities learning to drive robots and things like that are just a complete waste of time if you don't speak the language.
Yeah.
Talking of new competitions, we've also got the kind of logical conclusion to the anger against the cancellation of Robot Wars in Bogglebots. And I know this is something that you haven't really seen about yet. So what Bogglebots is, it is a Beetleweight web series, which is being made by some clearly very talented and committed Robot Wars fans, featuring what's looking like a really good cast of well-known faces. So what they're doing is they're getting together a team of people with some sort of video making experience, putting on an event in, I think, Bristol in September for Beetleweights to turn into a web series. I am very excited to see what comes out of this, because it really sort of links in with this thing that we've been talking about quite a lot in terms of Robot Wars being kind of prime territory for fan content. We've got such a sort of tech-literate audience that it really makes sense that the void is going to be filled by the fans. And even better, we've got people from the community itself, established teams getting behind this. We've got Tim Rackley and Shane Lale as referees. We've got Alistair Sutherland, a very experienced live event commentator, doing commentary. We've got Shane Swan from Push to Exit judging. I'd be very surprised if we didn't see more sort of very well-known faces come on board with this.
Cool, yeah.
I really don't know what else to say about it, except I'm excited.
Yeah, I really hope we see some. I'm sure we will, and I really do hope to see some really good, exciting robots in that as well. That'd be really cool.
I'm not good at calls to action, but if anybody hasn't checked this out yet, do get on Facebook and Twitter. I'll have some links down in the show notes. Just search for Bogglebots. You know how to use the internet. You found us. Yeah. I can't sell stuff. I'm terrible.
Well, we've got some more promotion stuff to do. We're doing a live stream for our 1-year anniversary, I guess, on the 26th of May. We'll be starting at about 7 p.m. BST, and I'll leave it to you to convert that to whatever time zone you're in. Yeah, should be a laugh. There'll be a chat room. You can go to spinnerproof.com/live to see all that.
I just love how uncomfortable we both are with self-promotion.
It's just terrible. It's the worst. I effectively do self-promotion at the end of every episode, and I still don't like it.
But that's to a script, so that's fine.
That is to more of a script, yeah.
Talking of self-promotion, though.
Oh, God.
Let's just take a second to talk about last episode's title. Now, I was totally on board with that title when you suggested it. I loved it. I still love it. But obviously, I post this up on Facebook in a few places, and I decided to put it on a couple of groups that I haven't put it on before, sort of more BattleBots-oriented ones, which was fine until I put the link in, and it comes up with the link that just says, episode 29.mp3, and makes us look like complete amateurs.
Well, if that doesn't make people want to click through and see what's going on, then I don't know what will. I mean, between that and Alan, I mean, come on.
I feel like we put up barriers to entry rather than actually helping people find out what we do. So yeah, anyone that has managed to find us, yeah, well done. Because we haven't helped.
I really like all our titles. I think the Puffin Problem really cracks me up as well.
Oh, yes.
That is a fantastic title.
I'm almost tempted to just take a quick look and remind myself of some of them. Which is not at all helpful to what we're doing here, but, nostalgia feels good, right? I'm still a massive fan of Manufacturing Controversy, just because I think it sums up every single thing we've done. Although the ventoning was also great, just so I remember how much you made me laugh with that.
They're all great titles. This is
for episode 30, we might have to do a rundown of our best episodes.
Oh, no, because that would
Direct all these new listeners that we're not managing to find.
I think we're being a bit too self-congratulatory on our titles. I don't think we need to do it about episodes as well. Spinnerproof reviews, Spinnerproof episodes is not... that's not a good segment.
This is actually turning into a top 10s podcast, did I not tell you?
Oh, God. Top 10 reasons to listen to Spinnerproof.
And that is the perfect time to move on.
BattleBots.
That thing that we came here to talk about.
That thing what we watch, yeah.
This episode was very different to the last one.
Was it?
In terms of... The last episode was defined by having consistently good fights. And this episode is defined more by having a selection of huge hits. The fights themselves, there are a couple of really short ones. They're not the most memorable contests, but we've had enough big hits that we're not going to forget this episode too easily.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's memorable moments rather than memorable fights. But yeah, it is. I still enjoyed this. I still really enjoyed watching this one. So I still think it's good.
The one downside for this episode is that by having shorter fights, we have had slightly more fluff, but we still managed to get into a fight within 6 minutes, and I still massively appreciate this pace.
Yeah, and I think the extra fluff, I guess, was, or one of the bits of extra fluff mainly was the different intro. There's like that little intro segment right at the beginning for Ice Wave, sort of like watching it spin up in the little test box thing, which I thought was quite cool. I think it was just a nice little thing to do, really.
I think, if anything, we might find ourselves appreciating this fluff more just because the pace has been so relentless.
Well, like it's good stuff because I think it's just interesting to sort of highlight slightly more unusual robots. Like there aren't many robots anymore that use a petrol engine, or approximately petrol anyway. So it's sort of quite interesting to see an internal combustion engine. There we go. So it's quite, I think it's just nice to draw attention to that and sort of explain why on earth they've got this ridiculously large box thing on top of their robot. So it's cool.
I wonder what their reasoning is for having an internal combustion engine, because I'm assuming it's just because we can.
That's got to be it, yeah.
I'm trying to think of other robots in even the vaguely modern era that have actually had petrol engines. So obviously, if you go back to Series 7 of Robot Wars, the Killalot was still running on petrol. I think Typhoon might have been petrol-driven on the weapon, actually. Or Typhoon 2, sorry, but I can't quite recall. Someone will correct me, I'm sure. But it is one of those things that has a huge amount of downsides. And from a competitive point of view, it doesn't seem like a particularly good choice. But the fact that Ice Wave is there, and is just so clearly built around that engine, the ridiculous shape that it forces it to have, I absolutely love.
Yeah, you've got to have a lot of respect for that team for just sticking with a robot that they, fundamentally only works one way up. I don't think there's anything they can really do about that. It's got a whole bunch of, I imagine that's a much heavier setup than it needs to be if they were using electric motors to drive it. A whole bunch of compromises. But yeah, I've got a lot of respect for them for just pushing it as far as they possibly can. It's just in the same way that I have respect for like Porsche, who consistently try to push the 911 thing with the engine that's way too far back.
Yep.
And just keep trying to balance that car despite the fact it's a ridiculous thing to do. And it's like at some point it goes from you're an idiot to okay, I can respect that. Like you're gonna keep going until you get it. But
I think we both respect a little bit of stubbornness. That idea of, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to do it the best I possibly can. I don't care if it's a bad idea, I'm going to make it the best bad idea it can be. And Ice Wave definitely achieves that. I saw a little, very, very, very mini spoiler for this fight on Facebook, where on Vanquish's page, they put up a couple of images from the fight as a kind of teaser.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at those images and I saw a couple of scuffs on the front plough and thought, oh, wow, that thing's really holding up to Ice Wave. Yeah, that went well, didn't it?
That moment in the fight was jaw-dropping to me. I just couldn't sort of believe what I'd just seen. Because I was thinking, like, when was watching the fight and thinking, oh, man, yeah, that front wedge, that's holding up really well. It's, Vanquish is doing a fantastic job of taking these hits. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't anymore. And in the most spectacular way.
I still want to know how.
I don't understand how that happened. It's just astonishing to rip a robot in half like that is an impressive feat, I have to say.
My only theory on what happened is that, because of course that plough has got the nicely curved sides, the folded over sides, as you tend to do for facing up to horizontals. The idea being that an opponent can't really get a bite. I'm guessing that what Ice Wave did was manage to get a good bite into the hole that it had already started making.
Mm.
But even then, the fact that it's taken off more than it's left behind, I find really confusing.
It's just, yeah,
it's like left the light bit behind.
I would guess that the sort of the lighter bit must have just been sort of like almost wedged against something on the floor. Maybe I don't know if it was like caught on a panel or on caught of one of those mysterious flippers that I've only just noticed exist. So like maybe it was maybe something like that happened. I don't know, or maybe it was caught on like the holes where the saws come up or something like that.
I can't even speculate anymore. It was just amazing. And the worst thing is he was driving it incredibly well.
Yeah, Vanquish was doing really well, and it's an interesting robot. I wanted to ask you actually what you think of the way their weapon works, because they've got like that lifting wedge thing, and it's a mechanism that I don't think we see very often. It seemed to me like it's probably very good at being a bit of a pain in the neck for other robots, rather than I don't know how good it is at actually sort of like fully inverting a robot, but it seems like an interesting little idea, really.
I swear every time we see a weapon like this, you say the same thing. We've had this conversation before for suspension with King of Bots. It's the same style of weapon. It's the same style of weapon as Stinger as well.
I'm Ryan. I know more about.
I'm Sam. I don't remember conversations we've previously had.
We've had a lot of conversations.
And I'm going to allow Ryan to ignore the fact that he's said, re-said sentences at least 3 times during recording so far.
Well, okay, don't talk about the weapon then. I'm sorry for trying to start a conversation about the weapon on an interesting robot that was well driven.
You see, what you haven't let me get to there is the fact that I was going to say I want to talk about it anyway because I love this style of weapon.
Well, go, talk about it.
I'm not sure I want to now. No, it's one of those things that it feels like it does largely exist to get around an active weapon rule. It is a way of bringing a wedge. And as someone who thinks the active weapon rules are kind of dumb, I absolutely love that. We need robots like this. As ironic as it seems to say this after this fight, we need robots like this to stop the big horizontals completely dominating things. And the reason that a lot of us saw this matchup and went, "Oh, that will be good," is because it's a big horizontal versus a wedge. And it might not seem like the most exciting fight to someone that hasn't watched much of this before, but anyone that's, for example, watched a lot of Robo Game stuff knows that they're often some of the best fights.
This is no exception, really, given the way it ended.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But there aren't that many robots out there that you'd look at and go, oh, yeah, they've got a realistic chance of taking Ice Wave out and not taking much damage.
Well, hopefully, one day, the Vanquish people will be able to build a robot that doesn't get split in half.
I'm not sure what's going on with Vanquish for the rest of the series now. Because Tweedy, the builder, sort of put a post on Reddit that, to me, implied that this was his only fight. He was sort of saying, sorry to anyone that wanted to see us do well. Hopefully they'll have us back next year. And to me, that kind of had a we're done vibe to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we are going to see him again. I don't know if he was possibly one of these mysterious alternates that no one can pin down a list of. I'm not sure that I want to know. I probably do want to know. I like knowing things. But hopefully we see it again, and hopefully we see it in a slightly kinder matchup.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of I don't really know how much time they've got to sort of repair robots. I know that I guess we'll get onto this later, where Witch Doctor sort of did some miraculous stuff to sort of rebuild some of their robot. But I don't know if they even would have had time to rebuild Vanquish in any meaningful way. I don't know if it was sort of like, maybe this was their only fight because they were one of these mysterious extra people there, or maybe this was their only fight because they just couldn't get it put together in time again.
From what a lot of builders have been saying, it seems like in these early stages they had a lot of time between fights, potentially multiple days. And with the way that everything is set up, it's not difficult to imagine a team being able to go to the producers and say, look, we're not ready for this yet, but give us another half day, we will be. And I feel like it would be easier for this to switch up the order of filming than it would be for a bracket.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. Well, we'll see if we see them again, I suppose.
One thing we can say is they'll need 3 very good wins if they are going to go through after that.
Yes, 3 indisputable solid wins. What do you think of the 360 camera that was on Ice Wave, which I presume was...
I hate them.
I presume this was insisted on by production because it's on a few other robots. I think they're on a lot of the robots, and I've seen them on a couple of them. But yeah, they look pretty naff, don't they?
It took me a while to realise what they were. I thought people had left a screwdriver in their Switch. But no, 360 cameras just don't make watchable videos.
Yeah, see, I didn't really realise what these things were until I saw. I think there was like the video from Red Devil at some point when it sort of clocked. Oh, that must have been because it was sort of like that's a 360 camera stuff. I think they've done a reasonably good job of sort of using the 360 camera as well, of sort of having the view that's on YouTube be like panning around in the direction the robot's moving. But yeah, it's an odd thing to have done. I guess they're sort of just trying something out, I suppose.
Is the version on YouTube doing that? I think it might depend on what device you're viewing it on.
Oh, maybe the one I had...
Which is not how media should work.
Yeah. Was it the one that was sort of like... where you can pan around and look around yourself. Yeah, I mean, it felt like the one that I was watching, it seemed like it was just panning itself towards a direction. But yeah, I'd sort of forgotten that there are 360 videos that you can look around with yourself.
I just don't see why you'd go for that rather than just sticking a GoPro on the machine, pointing forwards where most stuff's going to happen.
Well, I can sort of see why they've done it. I think it's an interesting idea. It's just a shame that they sort of stand out on these robots a bit. Like it kind of ruined a little bit of the appearance of Icewave there.
It's almost as bad as the neutral camera drone we had in the Sub-Zero Huge fight, which subsequently crashed. And can I say how disappointed I was to see that the video they put of that up on YouTube started off with a really descriptive title, and within 2 hours had gone full clickbait of, is this the worst drone pilot ever? Or something along those lines.
Oh, that is disappointing. I feel like once you've put a title on something, I feel like it should be just illegal to change it.
In fairness, William Osman did that for one of his BattleBot videos, and I was glad because the original title was terrible and didn't have the word BattleBots in it. And I wanted more people to see that video because it was really good.
Well.
So sometimes I like clickbait, but only if I like the video first. Shall we continue to a couple of the more unique designs at BattleBots? Rotator versus Petunia.
Yeah.
Now, I can't remember what you thought of Rotator last time round. More importantly, I can't remember what I thought of it either. Which causes me anxiety as we go into talking about it.
I can't remember what I would have thought about it before. I can only tell you what I think about it now, which is that I still think it's a... I feel like it's a vaguely interesting idea again, I guess, but like all kinetic energy weapons, it just always just seems like a more sensible thing to put all of your weight and energy into just one rather than two. The thing that I really notice about Rotator, especially in this, is obviously its wheels are directly on its center of gravity, I guess. So it's like really sort of balanced quite carefully on those wheels, which means that it's quite wobbly as it moves around. And I sort of like, I guess I was sort of trying to think of like how could you do something about that? I guess once the discs are spinning, you just got the gyroscopic effect will just keep it roughly level and it's going to be all right. But I was wondering if as well you could have like some kind of silly accelerometer somewhere in the robot that knew which way it was up and then shifted weights forwards and backwards depending on which way it was up, so it would sort of have more of a tendency to tilt like towards the disc that was lower maybe. But
I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well just make Rotator a Melty Brains robot. So it spins the discs up and then spins itself up.
Oh my god. That would be glorious.
And would probably very easily exceed a tip speed limit, but still, it would be amazing. And that is basically what they were reduced to during this fight at one point.
Yeah.
I would imagine that they just run it on the two wheels and hard points on each side.
I think that's what they currently do, and I sort of like it's just sort of a shame that it ends up being it looks like wobbly and unstable, and I just sort of think it'd be nice if it didn't have that. And I guess
I think it only looked that when the weapons weren't working, and once the weapons like that or a robot like that aren't working, well, it's boned anyway.
Yeah, I think it definitely needs those weapons to be working just for everything about it. I'd like to see them fight with their weapons in this competition fully at full speed at some point.
They certainly showed some ability to do damage in the brief time they had their weapons working. That was a really nice sort of double hit they pulled.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. It hadn't really occurred to me that that's sort of something that they can do, is they get the big hit, and then obviously as their robot gets pulled around, they've got another spinner at the back that just gets pulled into their opponent as well. It's a really interesting side effect of the of the weapon design, which is quite cool. And yeah, they can deliver quite a lot of damage. It was almost, I feel like they started peeling the armor off Petunia, and I don't feel like that was like the maximum power that they could deliver. I feel like wasn't quite a glancing blow, but I don't think it was a full direct hit either. So it's sort of, I think they've got a lot of potential in those weapons to do damage.
I'm not sure why you're seeing that as a glancing blow. That looked like it was pretty much full bore from them to me.
Maybe you're right. I don't know.
But maybe that's just based on an assumption that it's not capable of huge damage.
Yeah. I don't know. I would just think just because just every now and again the horizontals get such a mind-bendingly big hit, and I just sort of feel like I can see no reason why Rotator can't do that as well. But yeah, I mean, it was a good hit.
The problem I've got is that in my head, I'm grouping Rotator and Chromefly together. Although Chromefly did some decent damage to Bronco, to be fair, with next to no weight in those weapons. So it could be that everything I believe about spinning weapons is wrong.
It could be. Maybe you know nothing.
I think that's the most likely result.
We get the introduction for Petunia, right? This made, for me, Faruq entirely worthwhile in BattleBots. Right?
Wow.
This pun that he gave at some point, it's going in for the Clara kill.
That was amazing.
I was on the floor. It was just fantastic. I don't know what it was about that. It just really tickled me. All of the flower puns.
I kind of feel bad for Faruq this series.
Why?
Because he's got to come up with 3 or 4 for every robot. The quality has to dip as we go through, surely.
Oh dear, I don't know, but that really made me laugh. The whole intro for Petunia just tickled me, but that particular pun was like, okay, Faruq, you've earned your place in BattleBots. I will. Well, I'm sure I will still complain about his presence there, but it's fine.
I'll be sure to tag him in the tweet when this goes out, so you can know that he's finally won your approval.
That's all he wants in life, is the approval of some stranger on the internet.
Thing is, you seem to think I'm joking. I've already got this
Please
tweet
don't.
written in my head.
Oh.
What's it worth to you, Sam? What's it worth to you? This is broadcast blackmail.
I'll tell you what, right? If you don't make that tweet, I will upload this episode. How's that?
Damn, I should have played my cards closer to my chest on this one. I could have just done it anyway and not told you. You wouldn't have realised for like 2 hours anyway. I've not played this well.
No.
Shall we have a word for Petunia then, in terms of their design? I'm guessing you're distinctly unhappy with it.
I sort of am and I'm not. Like I do quite like. I can't articulate why I quite like Petunia, but I kind of do. I feel a little, I guess, blue-balled by it a little bit, because there were a few moments where it had a good grip and then didn't do anything. It was infuriating. It was like all lined up for the beauty shot, the money shot that I'm always looking for with Crushers, and it didn't do it. But
Things I thought I'd never hear you say. The amount of times I've stopped myself from using that phrase, thinking you'd go, ugh. When I first saw Petunia, I wasn't convinced by it at all. I suppose in a sense I'm still not, because it does look quite ungainly to me. And the wedge looks a bit steep to really do the job of being an offensive wedge. Good defensive wedge, but in terms of actually getting under stuff to use the weapon, I'm not sure how effective it's going to be, and I don't think that Rotator was any kind of challenge for that, because once those discs are stopped, it's basically made of ground clearance. So in those respects, I wasn't sure about it, but I'm pleasantly surprised by the power it seemed to have, seeing as it was basically coming down on what looked like solid metal bulkheads. I don't think you'd expect any Crusher to go through that. If they'd been able to get a bit further on, which again is where a less steep wedge would help, but there you go. It looked like they would have been going through plastic, and then we would have really seen it. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think the wedge kind of like prohibits a lot of things that this robot can do. I think it works quite well as a control bot. Like not the greatest control bot, but reasonably well. I mean, the way they used the kill saws at the end there, I think was great. Yeah, I think I would. The problem is, I think if they lengthened their wedge out and made it shallower, I think it would end up being a little too close to looking like Razor, and then I'd have complaints about that. So they can't win really. But yeah, it's an interesting robot. I do look forward to seeing it fight again. It's just a shame.
I look forward to seeing it fight again and not losing the tip of the Crusher as well. Just so we got more chance of seeing that slow crush that we all need.
Yeah, that properly seemed to sort of like shatter off at some point. It was weird.
It was when they went down on the disc, I think. It seemed like they almost left it in the disc, like it penetrated a little bit, and when they came up again, it just stayed on there, I think.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the judge's decision?
Once again, I'm surprised that it's unanimous. That's the thing that surprises me about some of these fights. Is I guess Petunia got it at the end because they sort of like had control of the fight, and they sort of used their primary weapon a little bit to like use the kill source to do some damage and stuff maybe. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a close one. I'm sort of fine with Petunia getting it. I would have been fine if Rotator got it, I think. But yeah.
I feel like the fact we're getting so many unanimous decisions is a sign of the judging criteria being applied very consistently. It's a bit early to say that, really. We've not had many, but I hope it's a sign that that's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That is true.
So, for example, Cherub versus PP3D. You'd look at that fight and you go, that's not the right decision. But when you look at it more closely in terms of the criteria, you see why they had to make it. Whereas here, what we've got are close fights that we agree with, but I think if we did go through them a little more carefully and went through the criteria, we'd probably come to the same conclusion as well. So with this, for example, damage, about even. You know, Petunia has taken that armour damage, but Rotator has lost its whole weapon system. Aggression, Petunia has to have, because Rotator's got no weapons for most of the fight. Control, absolutely no way you can give that to Rotator. The best they could do really was spin on the spot at times. Whereas Petunia has got control of them, move them around, use the hazards. And then in terms of strategy as well, again, even if that was evens going into the last 30 seconds, as soon as they use that saw, they've got that point as well. So I think it's almost, you know, the best case scenario for Rotator is that you split the damage points, and they're still 4-1 down on every judge.
Yeah, you have convinced me that the unanimous decision is a good thing, so there you go.
It's not good for our controversy, though, is it? Which we do need.
No. But there you go. Such is life.
Next up, we got Red Devil versus Brutus.
Yes.
Big contrast in designs here.
Yeah.
Something very original and unusual versus a two-wheel drive vertical.
I feel like Brutus was slightly more unique last time, but
Well, it had guns on it.
Yeah, slightly more unique. So yeah, it's still a fairly typical vertical weapon of some description. I think Red Devil lost something a little bit with their scoop as well. I think they certainly lost. I think that was the right choice for the fight, but they certainly lost a certain cool factor by using it.
Yeah, it sort of loses that insect-like appearance, doesn't it? It feels less animalistic in general, really, with the scoop on, which is a shame. But it was, as you say, the right choice. By far the best choice. I kind of think that Brutus is just very functional now. They had the showmanship last time round with the guns and the pyrotechnics, and now they're black and gold, and that's about the height of it.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that was just time constraints. It was sort of like we've got time to make a robot, but not time to make it pretty.
You'd imagine that's the case for a lot of teams.
Yeah.
There are some teams that have really gone to town with it. When you look at things like Battle Royale with Cheese, for example, that's all art plus some function, and we love it for it. But I feel like we are seeing far fewer teams that try and do both. That said, I think Brutus could be a very good machine still. I think it was good beforehand. It was just unlucky to come up against Tombstone. But they've had some major electronic issues in this fight.
Yeah, their weapon burns out quite early on, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, and some very suspicious commentary that came with that.
Yeah, what did they say?
Well, it struck me as unusual that the commentators commented that they could see flames at the exact moment they were visible on the camera angle we were looking at, rather than at the moment they would have been visible from their position watching in person.
You're not going to put that down to a coincidence then?
I mean, I could, but it would be dishonest of me to say that I believe it's a coincidence. I acknowledge that it could be.
I mean, it's like, surely they've got the power to sort of like change where the cut is. Like, they record it on a bunch of cameras,
of course,
and then put the cut slightly before where the thing catches fire, so that the commentary lines up with what the audience can see. I mean, that just seems like good editing.
I'd say other way round. You just take the moment that they noticed it and use that audio in the moment where it's first visible on camera. Because there's only a little sort of hole that you can see the flames through. It's fine. It's just one of those things that reminds me I'm watching a non-live TV show. And I'm proud of myself for noticing. It's more that, really.
Tooting your own horn, are you?
Oh, exactly, yeah. I feel like you wanted me to make that dirty, but I refused.
So Brutus gets stuck on a horn a little later on. They've got the Red Devil have horns on the sides of their scoop, and then Brutus just gets stuck on top of one of them for quite a while. And I wanted to ask you, as I often do in these situations, about the pinning rules.
Yes. I thought there was actually going to be a question there.
Sorry,
that's fine.
I wanted to ask you, as I always do, about the pinning rules. There you go, get the inflection right.
I was confused by this as well. I'm not quite sure what rule applies here, because there's a pinning rule and there's a grappling rule. I think that's a distinction they make. Pinning is static, grappling is mobile. So for pinning, I think you get 10 seconds, and for grappling, I think you get 30. I think this should have been classed as a pin because they weren't moving around at the time. You know, a good example of a grapple would be complete control, picking up bombshell, and driving around with them with the flames on for 30 seconds. This was not that. So yeah, I feel like they should have been separated sooner. I feel like Brutus's drive was dead anyway, so I'm not sure it made a big difference. because it seemed like they had an internal problem. They had an internal fire that was wrecking their speed controllers anyway. So I feel like they wouldn't have been going anywhere afterwards. I suppose the only difference is, would they have had an extra few seconds of mobility to potentially do something decisive to Red Devil?
I guess my other question, I guess, is sort of like, if in these situations, it's not as if Red Devil has sort of like intentionally pinned the other robot. It's just like Brutus is just stuck on them. And it's like, I don't think there was any way really for either robot to get out of that situation. So I'm sort of just curious, like, what happens? Like, if you're gonna say that can happen for 10 seconds and then it doesn't, and then they don't separate, what's the recourse there? What's the course of action to do that? Do you have to pause the fight, go in there, take them apart, and then resume it, or do you declare a winner, or what? I mean, what do you do?
So if robots are stuck together and it's safe to do so, a timeout is called and someone goes in to separate them. If it's not safe to do so, then that would presumably be an issue with a robot being out of control but also pinned. I imagine that would be a forfeiture on the unsafe robot's part. I would say that neither of those apply here, because Red Devil could very easily have just lifted the centropod. Centropod, that makes that sound like a real thing. The center pod. And would probably have released Brutus. I think they just didn't want to and maybe didn't get a call to do it. Or maybe the edit we've seen was a little bit dodgy in that it's extended the time they were together to make the soaring look more spectacular. Which is a thing that happens.
Yeah. I think it sort of needed...
The saw was a letdown.
Yeah, it's just, they don't even... That was sort of like ideal conditions for a saw, and it still just didn't do the kind of damage that you'd sort of hope that they can.
So the explanation I've seen for this is basically that using the saw takes a certain degree of skill, and none of this team have ever used a robot before. So they tried to use the saw earlier, used it too aggressively, and broken a lot of the teeth off, which basically left them with a glorified grinding disc, because that's a carbide-toothed blade on there. And those things will go through a lot. They will go through titanium, they will go through aluminium. I don't know how they are on hardened steel, actually, but they'll get through most things to a degree. And evidently what it was doing there was not nearly what it's capable of. I still think that even without the failure that Brutus had, I don't see how they were getting anything out of this fight. Red Devil had a very easy time of just staying faced up. They were out-wedging them every single time.
Yeah, that scoop they have on the front is very effective, isn't it, at staying under their robots. And they were, like you say, they were very good, just very well driven, really, to sort of keep them pointing in the right direction all the time. There wasn't much that Brutus had on them, really.
Did you manage to read what the issue was with Brutus, by the way?
No, I didn't.
It's not necessarily an interesting failure, but it's definitely an interesting solution. So the issue they had, to use the words of the teams themselves, is we were twice as powerful as we should have been. So I don't know if they're talking about they were drawing twice as much current as they wanted or whatever. I know they're using brushless speed controllers that are still quite new and not necessarily the most reliable. So do you know what their fix was?
I don't know, half the power somehow. How did they do that?
They halved the power by just reprogramming their transmitter to transmit a 50% throttle signal at full throttle on the transmitter. That is the kind of problem solving I love.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that.
Do we mess with the firmware on this extremely complicated piece of electronics? Nah, just change that slider. Perfect. Love it.
That's brilliant, yeah. Well, it works. And if it's simple and it works, then it's good.
Anything else on that fight?
No, I don't think so.
Do you want to introduce the next one then for variety?
So we have Captain Shredderator versus Endgame.
Pretty classic matchup, this, really. A vertical and a full body spinner. You expect some big hits.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily get them, but you expect them.
I really liked that. Endgame is talking about like we're gonna rush them. We're gonna sort of go straight out of there and get straight in there, straight on them, and then proceed to not move for most of the fight.
I'm hoping that at some point on an episode, I managed to say that I thought Endgame were the dark horse of the series. If I didn't say that, I'm saying it now, but it seems less impressive to say it now than it would have before. I think this is a very scary machine.
I feel like, are you seeing something that I'm not? Because so I feel like Kenny and Chris really hyped Endgame up, right? They're talking about them sort of like hanging back and all kind, and sort of like waiting for the right moment and stuff. And I'm not saying that Endgame is by any stretch of the imagination a bad robot, but this fight just seemed like it was a robot that had a lot of problems with its drive. Like I never felt like it was like its lack of movement. It didn't feel like that was tactics. That just felt like they were struggling to get their robot to do what they wanted it to do. And like So like, I don't know why you're sort of like, just what do you see in it that I feel like I'm not seeing, that sort of makes you say it's a dark horse, and that Kenny and Chris got really excited about it as well? It's like, what's there that I'm not seeing? It just looks like a fairly normal vertical spinner to me.
I'll address that question in two parts. Number one, what do I see in it? What I see is footage from this year's Fight My Bots in China that they won. What I see is the footage of them against the new Dietor, where they basically sent it into the ceiling a couple of times. This is a very powerful vertical. And, of course, the standard of competition is going to be higher at BattleBots, but they have got the offense. And they will have made improvements since then as well. So it's going to be a scary machine to face. As for what was wrong with the drive, there was one very simple problem, which is that they built a robot to drive on a perfectly flat floor, and when they got there wasn't a perfectly flat floor. So it's one of those things where you imagine this happens to a lot of new teams. You go there thinking, oh, this is a high-level event, the floor will be flat, and that's just not realistic. So the team was saying that all they had to do was go back in the pits, spend an hour with an angle grinder, and that problem was solved. And now they're very fortunate that they came up against another robot that was having drive issues in this fight, because had they taken big damage, it would have been a big issue for them going forwards. But they've still been able, despite the massive drive issues they were having, to show what power they've got in the weapon.
Yeah, it's, because I'm not sort of trying to claim this is in any way a bad robot. It's just sort of, your reaction to it and then the commentator's reaction just sort of felt a bit off from what I've seen in this fight. This is the first time I've seen this robot, to my knowledge, and so yeah, I mean, I look forward to seeing it fight again. I hope that we get to see it do the things that you're describing in this series.
It is interesting that they're hyping them so much in commentary, because I will say that was not good commentary on that fight. Normally, they're good at pointing out when there is a problem. In this case, they seem to be intentionally not doing that. And I wonder if that's something that's been added afterwards based on them knowing that it's going to do well. I certainly hope that's the case, because I want it to do well.
I mean, if that's what they've done, that feels a bit disingenuous to me. Everything else about this...
It feels like TV.
I know it feels like a TV, but everything else about this is set up to sort of be like, this is the live thing that happened, and then, I don't know, post. I guess it's to be expected, but I mean, they were really hamming it up, and it just and it just felt out of place.
I completely agree. And the thing I've really praised this series on so far is that live feel. And I'm very well aware that live feel is a result of careful editing. If what we were being presented with was actually what had happened live in terms of the commentary, it'd be terrible. I know they're adding a lot of stuff in afterwards. They're rejigging things so they make sense. I think listening to a Jonathan Pierce commentary gives you a very good idea of what it's like when editing is just left to what seems like a single take. And it's not always very good to listen to.
Yeah.
And I think it is a necessary evil that we're going to have some bits like this that are just a bit weird because of it.
Yeah, fair enough.
We should probably spend a second talking about Shredderator as well, because they've underperformed in this fight massively, and I know they know it from what they've been saying after the fight.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shame, really, that they didn't get what they wanted. Do you think it was just bad driving on their part, or were they struggling with the floor as well?
So they seem to have the same sort of issue that Red Devil has, in terms of there's a team with two robots. One robot is in China and one is at BattleBots. And basically, the one in China is the one they're prioritising. So in the case of Red Devil, that was the team that went. So Jerome Miles, who actually built Red Devil, was in China and handed it off to a different team. So that's obviously compromising Red Devil's performance a little.
Yep.
In this case, all of the good electronics and internals are in the version that's in China, and this is running kind of older kit.
Ah, fair enough.
So it's not the best Shredderator it can be. It's still better than the one from last season, I think, because I love this body shape. Whereas last time we had the kind of hockey puck thing.
Yeah, this is a bit... It's got the slightly more slanted side and stuff, hasn't it? Yeah.
It still doesn't bother trying to self-write or anything, but I think if it did that, it would basically be Megabyte, so...
Yeah, there's not really much you can do with that design to give it a self-writing mechanism, really.
There's one very interesting thing about Shredderator, though, that has led to a lot of questions in my mind. And that is, why does the transmitter still have a massive old-school antenna on it?
Maybe they're compensating for something. I don't know. I'm not going to put that in.
Compensating for an underperforming robot, you mean? Because what else would you have meant?
I don't know. I don't know why it has that. I mean, I guess they just feel like there's some range, like reliability with the transmitter that they want to do, or maybe that's just the transmitter they have and they haven't bought a new one. I don't know.
Well, they have to be running 2.4 gigahertz. That's in the rules that you have to be running that. I don't know if a old school antenna like that can even be used with that system. I'm wondering if it's a weird piece of mind games or just a kind of comfort thing for the person holding the transmitter that they like having that up there.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
But I really hope that someone out there can give us a proper answer on whether that is a useful thing or not, because I just want to know.
Anything else on this fight, Ryan?
Yeah, we've spoken about Shredderator's struggles, but obviously I suppose we haven't necessarily glossed over end games, but it wasn't a good fight for either of them. Which makes it a very weird time to call out Tombstone as an opponent when you've limped through a fight against a barely functioning opponent. Maybe they could have waited to do that.
Yeah, it's a bit headstrong, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's presumptuous. It's awkward posturing in a way. Because that would be, no matter how good your vertical is, that's not a good matchup for you. Big horizontal bar versus small vertical disc is not a good matchup.
I don't know. I guess they're just playing up a persona there, aren't they? Because, I mean, they're all about the sunglasses that are always on and all that kind of stuff. So, I think they're just...
Maybe they're overcompensating for something as well. The fact their country isn't on a map.
You're such an arse.
And if you want that joke to stay in, you've now got to put your
own
own
in.
in.
That's what I'm annoyed about.
I suppose we should get on to the main event then, which, funnily enough, is the fight I have the least notes for.
Yeah, it's sort of... It's Yeti versus Witch Doctor, and it's not the world's most exciting fight, I have to say.
I think, as matchups go, it's not a particularly exciting one. They're two very good machines, two machines that I'm always happy to see fighting, but I think sort of pseudo-drum versus drum, is that the most exciting matchup they could have put together for the second show? Beforehand, I'd have maybe said that Endgame and Shredderator would be a better fight. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way, but yeah, it's a slightly interesting choice. I suppose it's a good way for them to introduce some fairly big players to a new section of the audience.
Yeah,
I think that's maybe an element of what's happening with the main events, and they've got two very charismatic teams there as well.
Yeah.
Which definitely helps when you're trying to hype something.
I think the most interesting thing to come out of this fight for me is the video that the Witch Doctor team have sort of released since, explaining what went wrong in that fight. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So they're explaining that that they've used different motors this time. They're using motors that are smaller but take a higher voltage, so they've got the same power as their old motors, which lets them put more weight somewhere else. I think they put it in their weapon, I presume, or their armor, but
largely in armor, I believe.
Largely in armor, yeah.
Because they've dropped the mini-bot as well. Remember?
Yeah, that's true. So, and then they're sort of also explaining that they've did some test. They're sort of testing it, and they sort of see it's beginning to smoke a little bit. So they put a current limiter in there, and they've limited the current to this thing down. I think they said like 1/3 of what it's rated to manage. When they heard that they were fighting against Yeti, it's like, well, we need this to be reliable. So they've limited its current down to 1/3 of what those things are rated for, and it's still gone, which is kind of surprising to me. But I guess it sort of really just shows just how tough it is in these arenas, and sort of like what your robot's actually going through is it's just sort of interesting that's sort of the problem that they had, is despite their best efforts and everything. I've always complained in the past about you should just know the limits of your motor and then don't exceed them, and these guys who know what they're doing have not only have they not exceeded the limits of their motor, they've gone to 1/3 of what they ostensibly can cope with, and they've still blown up. So it was really, really interesting to sort of see that video.
This is a point where I'd quite like to sort of engage with your electrical engineering knowledge, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to hype up that knowledge as much as I can before asking this question, just to make it more nerve-wracking for you. Where do issues with motors overheating arise? Is it purely when it stalls that you build up the heat? Or is it something that's building as part of normal use? Because the sort of thing that I imagined here is that maybe they'd tested it by just driving around, but hadn't tested it, trying to push something and constantly getting stalled out.
I think that the most efficient mode of operation for a motor is when it's spinning at its like optimum RPM and with no load. And I think as you load it up and as you slow it down, I think it starts to consume more power and therefore generates more heat. And the other thing I guess to note is that when it's spinning slower, I think a lot of these motors, I presume, have some kind of mechanism for sort of generating airflow across the coils, and as it's spinning slower, it's going to get less of that, so it's going to be generating more heat and generating less airflow, if it's generating airflow at all. And so I guess that's what's going on. but it's been a long time since I've studied motors, so I could be completely wrong.
Because the whole sort of temperature management thing is something that we never really speak about with robots, but it must be quite a serious consideration. You know, so speed controllers, for example, are going to want cooling. You see a lot of them with quite big heat sinks on them. Motors, obviously, at times need cooling as well. And when you see a robot like Duck, for example, that's very compact, that must be a major challenge that they've had to overcome somewhere down the line.
The advantage that Duck has is because it's like a solid piece of metal, they can probably just basically use their robot as a heatsink. So if you've got your motors mounted basically to this chassis and your chassis is just an enormous chunk of aluminium is a reasonably good conductor of heat. It's what a lot of heat sinks are made from, and so like you can use that. I mean, the only sort of experience I've got with doing that kind of thing, I guess, is in computers and stuff. You can buy cases that can do complete passive cooling of various components in your computer, mainly the CPU, and that works with just a heat pipe to the side of just a big aluminium case, and it just uses the case as a heatsink. So, you know, you can do that, and I would guess that that's sort of one of the advantages that robots like Duck get really from being a solid block of aluminium.
I'm glad I asked the question. Thank you.
I do wonder if any teams ever use some kind of thermal compound between the motor and their chassis. If they've got their chassis, like if they've got like these motors like directly attached to their chassis and like wrapped in the aluminium of their chassis, I wonder if they put thermal compound around there, if that would make any difference.
No, the other thing I've often wondered is whether teams have any more active cooling methods as well. So, for example, I imagine that there are times where having, you know, even something as simple as fans would probably be quite useful. I don't know if anyone's ever gone as far as like water cooling or something like that. That seems like a risky manoeuvre. Not necessarily the best use of weight, but...
Yeah, I would suggest that water cooling a robot is a terrible idea.
Liquid cooling.
So, yeah, liquid cooling. I suspect there are robots that do have little fans in them, like on key components. That seems like that would be a sensible thing to do.
It's really good for moral support during a fight. Just yay!
It would be much more of like a yeah.
I couldn't go that high in my current state.
Yeah, tiny little 80mm fan or something, or even smaller, 60mm.
We should probably talk about Yeti we haven't really spoken about Witch Doctor, but we should definitely talk about Yeti as well.
Yeah.
Yeti is huge. I'd
Drum.
forgotten just how big this robot is.
Drum on Yeti is ridiculous.
The best thing is, the one we saw him holding isn't the big drum. It's like a half-width one.
It's just ludicrous how big that robot is.
I suppose it's using the old air is armour routine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although I'm guessing no issues with cooling in there.
Well, no, because air is a good... like, as long as... if he's got airflow, it'd be fine. But if he's got, like, a sealed box with no airflow, then air
just created an oven.
Air is a very good insulator.
Wouldn't it be ironic if the robot from Alaska, named after a snow beast, meets its doom due to overheating?
Would that be ironic, though? I mean, like a big snow beast, I'd imagine to have lots of fur on it and stuff, and not
Actually,
be...
yeah,
not,
true.
Not be
it's in
adept
California.
to the hot climates of California.
Acclimatization is a real issue for machines. There's been one big upgrade to Yeti that I think was quite hard to spot, and that is that on the underside of the drum now, there are little casters or hard points or something to stop it getting sort of fouled up on the arena floor if it loses the two front wheels.
Yeah, I did spot that, yeah.
They've done the classic, just mitigate against the way you lost last time routine. Don't bother with anything else, just make sure you don't lose the same way twice.
It's a good addition, I think.
Oh yeah, and one that I'm surprised not to have seen on the top as well.
Well, you know, I guess they don't want to... They're all about, like, big attack damage, so, you know, and any weight they've got to take away from their weapon is weight they don't want to be using for anything else. So it's like they're going to, you know, I guess they could rely on their forks to try and self-right them if they need to.
The forks.
The forks.
Still not a big fan of the forks.
I think if they got rid of the forks, they would lose their magic of their robot, though.
Yes and no. I think I'd like to see them have a wider variety of forks, especially some much shorter forks. Because as they are, the main thing the forks do is keep opponents away from the drum. They're basically putting a little, like, set of roadwork barriers around their drum. There'll be tiny men in high-vis vests just flocking around it.
Yeah, it did seem like they're not the sharpest in the world. So I feel like there were a couple of times where they sort of were going with quite some speed at Witch Doctor, and then just sort of slammed into them with their forks, and then didn't actually hit them with the drum, which was a bit of a shame.
And I feel like they started doing better once the forks were damaged.
Yeah, maybe that'd be like a tactical thing in the future, maybe to just leave the forks wound back, have them sort of like backwards, like some kind of spiky anime hair, you know?
What?
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's just a surprisingly vivid image, that's all.
Imagine, maybe it's like charging towards another robot and it's got its arms spread out behind it rather than pumping.
What I want is some flailing behind it. I mean, the forks have their charm. I suppose one of the things it really allows them to do is get unstuck from bad situations. So, for example, against Lucky, they were sort of propped up on Lucky, would have had difficulty driving away, but by using the forks, were able to not only escape, but do more damage to Lucky as a result by knocking the whole flipper off. So they definitely have their use. As I say, I just like to see them compromise a little more for fights like this.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's much more to say about this fight, other than I guess sort of like go through the sort of the second half, I guess, of the Witch Doctor video, which is that they have replaced the motors apparently after this fight. They got their old motors, their bigger 24-volt ones, overnight shipped to them, and then were able to rejigger the inside of their robot in such a way that they can fit the larger motors in there. And I think in order to accommodate the lower voltage, they just removed a battery, which got them some of the weight back as well. So
I think the term rejigger maybe hasn't quite done the amount of work involved justice.
Yeah, I think the full extent of the amount of rework they would have had to have done to get motors that are like at least twice the size of the old ones in that frame. I mean, it's an impressive thing to have been able to do, unquestionably. But I'm looking forward to seeing a more reliable Witch Doctor in its next fight.
Something we haven't mentioned, and I suppose can come up at this point, from a production point of view, is that it seems that the pits were a lot better this year for competitors. They had access to sort of full-on machining facilities there, without which I doubt this would have been possible, or something like this definitely wouldn't have been possible. It isn't something you'd have even thought of done to solve that issue.
No, because they basically redesigned their chassis and got it remachined, didn't they?
I imagine they had to, yeah. I don't think it was explicitly said in the video, but when you look at the style of robot it is, I doubt there was any other way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely insane to
maybe you find a local company that plasma cuts some stuff for you, or water cuts or whatever, but still a hell of an achievement. Of course, we don't know if it pays off. No idea if it pays off.
No, I'm hopeful though.
You see, the problem is I don't find Witch Doctor that interesting as a machine. I love the team, absolutely love the team. I love some of the fights it's been involved in, but no, I'm just finding it harder and harder to love any of the verticals. The only vertical I'd say I really love, or the only verticals I really love, are Yeti and Hypershock. Oh, and I suppose Monsoon, because Monsoon. And Hugh. Okay, there's quite a few, but two of those were very non-traditional ones compared to the sort of meta BattleBots vertical.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and sort of like Witch Doctor, I keep going backwards and forwards because it's sort of, I feel like it's constantly sort of oversold for this robot. It's like hyped up as this big deal, and then I don't feel like I've seen it do a lot of winning. But yeah, I really like the team, and I think that's why I'm hopeful that they get some good fights this series.
And they're one of the few teams, as we were saying earlier, that really do put the effort into balancing aesthetic and function.
Yeah, it's a cool looking robot.
Didn't win though, did it?
No, it
Sam's only allowed to like effective robots.
This is not true. How can you say that I'm only allowed to like effective robots when there have been several robots I like almost entirely because of the way they look? I mean,
no one ever said it had to be consistent.
But I am consistent. I am consistent in this.
Okay, withdrawn.
Damn straight.
Do your outro.
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episodes/30. And there you can find links to all the robots we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us your favourite episode of Futurama. And you can also follow us there for more details on exactly when we go live this Saturday, the 26th, at around 7. So, have you been on Reddit recently?
Once or twice, yeah.
Have you been given the new version of Reddit?
There have been attempts to give me the new version of Reddit. It's distinctive. Actually, no, it's not distinctive. What am I saying? It's completely undistinctive, non-distinctive. Other phrases for what I'm trying to say. Who turned Reddit into Facebook? When did this happen?
I don't think it looks like Facebook.
Oh, come on.
But it does look pretty horrific.
This is part of the ongoing mobile screenization of the internet, and it's not okay.
Oh god, the Reddit. Just a quick aside here to complain about the Reddit mobile site, which is just awful. Like, so I normally use a third-party Reddit client. It's called Apollo. You should check it out. It's awesome. But I only have that on my tablet. I don't have Reddit on my phone, because if I have Reddit on my phone, then I get nothing done ever. But every now and again, like after we've posted an episode, for example, I do want to occasionally just quickly check to see what's going on. And I've only got my phone handy, so I'll go to the website, and it's just awful. It's constantly trying to make you use their stupid app, and it's like, just have a website on a phone and don't tell me about your app, right? I'm aware that apps exist for websites, so you don't need to tell me constantly. Just have a website that works reasonably well on a mobile phone, please. That's all I have to say about that. It's rubbish.
Wow, we're going to be on different pages here then. To me, this new version of Reddit seems perfectly optimised for a mobile. We've got big expanses of plain unused space to the left and right when viewed on a normal screen. Everything is unnecessarily large. And yeah, well, that's the only two things that make it a mobile page, really.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so there's a couple of like viewing options, isn't there, for Reddit? So I was defaulted to, there's like the card layout, there's classic, and there's compact. There we go. So I was defaulted to classic, which is in the middle, and that seemed fine. Like, that's sort of like, it's still ugly, I think, but it's kind of usable. I think I'd get used to that. Yeah, the card layout is horrific. That is, I don't want that. That looks more like Twitter to me than Facebook, but yeah, that's awful.
That's also fair. The compact layout is even worse.
The compact layout is almost too compact. I don't know. It's weird. Oh god, I've just clicked on something and it doesn't take you to a new page properly. It's one of those stupid popover things.
That was going to be my next point, which is, to be fair, a non-mobile-y thing, which was going to kind of screw up my argument, which is why I was saving it. But it's just one of those things where companies make something that people like. And as we've established already today, people don't like change. And then what these companies do is they mistake changing things for making progress. And they've basically gone, oh, we've had this design for too long, we've got to update it. There's nothing wrong with the original thing. And I know how much this is going to annoy you. There's nothing wrong with the original thing. There's no need to change it. It's fine.
There are improvements that can be made to the old Reddit.
So I'm not entirely sure what I would want to change.
I think there's nothing really about like the layout that I have a particular problem with. I guess the things that they can change. So I use like the Reddit enhancement suite mainly because it gives me those, those like expando thingies for viewing images.
Yes, I don't remember how to use Reddit without that.
They exist on Reddit without Res, but only for certain hosts. And the thing that Res does is it gives you that on basically everything. And I think if that was in normal Reddit, that would be fantastic. So there's little changes like that can be improved. And I think you could also, I think you could make this look a little more modern, but without fundamentally changing the way that it works. And I think in the new Reddit, I think the sort of that middle layout, that classic one, I guess, is sort of the closest they've got to the modern version of the old layout. I could get used to that one, apart from the stupid popover thing when you click on a link. I want that to take me to a whole new page, please. I don't really want it to do this weird window within a window crap. But there you go.
I'm now having to remember what Reddit without Reddit Enhancement Suite looks like. So I'm just going to have to quickly find a non-res version of old Reddit.
It is.
So bear with me.
Reddit without res is amazingly bad. in all kinds of amazingly subtle ways.
So I've got to actually deactivate res in my incognito browsing. I didn't know it was activated in my incognito browsing because I only ever use it for logging into email accounts that I don't want to use again. And ordering engagement presents for my wife or something. I don't know what they think people use it for.
I think they know exactly what people use it for.
Yeah, logging into email accounts they don't want to log into again. I don't want all my passwords getting auto-saved. The joys of using an ancient laptop. Okay, the new version of Chrome doesn't seem to let you just deactivate stuff in incognito. That's fun.
Ha!
I'll deactivate it fully.
You should use Firefox.
I've always had a lot of issues with Firefox.
What are your issues with Firefox?
It was very crashy for me. It always has been.
I don't know. The new like Firefox version 60 is great. Or whatever.
I'm not going to pretend that Chrome is good, but okay, I'm now on the original version.
Okay.
And this confirms my main issue with the new version of Reddit, and that is the complete lack of differentiation by colour, which is one of the simplest things in design to get right. Something as basic as, I'm on the BattleBots page, because that's something that we're all going to know quite well. The 2 pinned posts on the old Reddit are green. I can tell they are pinned posts incredibly easily. On the new version, I've got a tiny little logo of a pin, and that's it. It's also significantly easier on the old Reddit to see when something is an advert or a promoted post, and I really don't like that change.
Well, so this was going to be one of my points about why companies change things, because the other big thing that companies often, like social media companies, change at some point when they've got a lot of users is they go from a chronological timeline to an algorithmic timeline.
Yes, which isn't a thing for Reddit, really.
No, because Reddit's always been sort of weird in the way that it sorts things. But like the reason companies do that, and the reason I presume that Reddit has sort of like made their ads a little bit more subtle and kind of made everything look a little bit more samey, is that they're trying to increase like measured engagement on their website, so how long you spend on there. And the thing about like a chronological timeline is that gives you a very definitive and real sense of completion. You can go, I have now seen everything because I've scrolled down until I've seen a post I've seen before, and therefore I am done. And then you can close the tab and it's easy. Whereas if you've got an algorithmic timeline that you can scroll forever on and constantly keep seeing kind of new stuff, it also means you're constantly seeing new adverts and generating more revenue for the company and stuff. So that's sort of like why that change is done a lot. It's never a change to make things better for users ever. And I feel like a similar thing is going to be true of Reddit. I think there are going to be slightly more insidious reasons to be changing things that are not about ostensibly improving the user experience for users, but for improving the user experience for ad providers.
I love that you make me even more down about the world. More cynical. The other thing I'm noticing as well, I don't know if this is happening for you on Firefox as well, but if I do click a link, the formatting of it isn't changed the next time I come back to this page, which kind of fits in with what you were saying in terms of, oh, just keep coming back for more. No sense of, you know, how far you've gone, how far you're going. Sort of, oh, I haven't been on this thing before. Great, I'll go on it.
For me, it does get a bit like it fades out a little bit. Like it's a subtle difference, but it is there.
I mean, is it at the point of subtle where it might as well not be there at all? Because for me, it certainly seems to be.
No, I think it could be more obvious. It's not as obvious as the links that change colour and go from blue to purple, but I mean, it's gone from a dark grey to a lighter grey for the title of the post. I don't like this. I don't like new.reddit.com. I think I'm going to be using old.reddit.com for as long as I can, and then when
I wonder how long they'll keep that around.
Not very long, I suspect.
That's upsetting. How long until someone comes along with a Chrome extension to turn new Reddit into old Reddit?
I'm sure people will try. The thing is, they'll change it, and then. So I sort of see this going a similar way to how Twitter's gone recently, where Twitter sort of changed a bunch about the way their website works to the point that it's just a god awful piece of rubbish that I can't bear to use. And as a result, I just use Twitter exclusively through third-party clients. And then they've recently announced that they're changing the pricing structure for access to those APIs. And they're priced in such a way that you can't afford them. Is basically what they're doing. Rather than doing the morally correct thing, in my view, of just shutting the API down if they don't want people to use it, they're just trying to sort of like do everything they possibly can to stop you from using it, but without actually getting rid of it, which is spineless in my view. So it's sort of like I can sort of the writing is on the wall for Twitter when eventually I will no longer be able to use a third-party client, and then I'm just going to stop using it. And Reddit feels like it might be going the same way. If they keep making the website worse, I'm going to just start using it exclusively through a third-party client, and then Reddit's going to start going, but the API for the third-party clients is going to get worse and worse and worse until eventually it becomes really expensive and no one can use it. And then it's like, well, goodbye, Reddit.
Just to check, TweetDeck isn't third-party, is it?
No, it is owned by Twitter now. So like TweetDeck is kind of reasonably safe, but I mean it is TweetDeck used to be better than it is now.
Oh yeah, it's not as good as it was, but it's a damn sight better than Twitter itself.
Yeah. Oh, one day TweetDeck will go the way of the dodo as well. But there you go.
Well, that was an uplifting end to this uplifting episode, wasn't it? I can make it more uplifting.
Yeah.
I just found my mouse. I was sat on it.